Get her out of here, she's wasting our time. The words cut through the luxury showroom like a blade, and all eyes turned toward the woman in faded jeans and scuffed sneakers. But what no one realized was, the person they were mocking owned every car in that room. Hi everyone. Today we're starting with a moment that should never happen to anyone, especially not in their own house. Imagine walking into a place you built from the ground up, a place filled with the dreams you turned into reality. Now imagine being humiliated in front of everyone there because they didn't recognize you and because of what you look like. This is that story, a story about pride, about justice, about the quiet fire that lives in those who've had to fight harder just to be seen. And make no mistake, this could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it right now. It was a mild Tuesday morning in San Diego, with the kind of golden haze that makes the glass storefronts on Crown Ridge Boulevard glow like freshly polished chrome. Crown Ridge Motors sat on the corner, sleek, modern, immaculate, a haven for luxury seekers, a shrine to horsepower and prestige. Inside, high-end vehicles gleamed under crystal lighting and the scent of imported leather mixed with soft jazz in the air. No one gave the silver Toyota Prius much attention when it rolled up to the dealership lot. Its side mirror was scuffed, its hubcaps dull. Out stepped a woman in simple jeans, a faded navy sweater, and well-worn sneakers. Her hair was tucked under a plain ball cap. She carried a canvas tote over one shoulder and paused only briefly to gaze at the dealership's glass doors. Her name was Danielle Green, 45 years old, calm, brilliant, and composed, CEO and founder of Green Auto Collective, a network of 47 luxury car dealerships spanning the country. But today, she wasn't a boss. She wasn't even a familiar face. Today, Danielle came as a mother and a customer. Her daughter Imani had just graduated with honors from Columbia Business School. Years of late nights, ramen dinners, and Zoom lectures finally culminated in a degree Danielle had only dreamed of once herself. And now she wanted to surprise Imani with something unforgettable, a new car. Not just any car, but a crown jewel coupe, the kind that turns heads, makes statements, and celebrates milestones. Danielle had already picked the model's sleek silver with a moonroof and the kind of handling that made the road feel like silk beneath your wheels. She'd reviewed specs, watched videos, and even compared trim options. But there was something else she wanted to know today. How would her employees treat a customer who didn't walk in with flashy clothes or flashy talk? How would they treat someone who looked ordinary? She adjusted her hat, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The atmosphere shifted the moment the glass doors slid open. Not for everyone, just for her. Customers sipped complimentary espresso at the consultation tables. Sales associates chuckled over showroom banter. But as Danielle entered, conversations, faltered eyes glanced, and silence fell in small, barely noticeable ripples. No one approached her. A young man in a crisp gray vest and glossy shoes looked up briefly from behind a desk, met her eyes, and immediately turned back to his screen. Across the room, a woman in heels nudged her companion and nodded toward Danielle. He laughed softly. Danielle pretended not to notice. She walked past the rows of polished vehicles, her gaze drifting briefly to a silver coupe near the center. The exact one. She paused near it, taking in every curve and detail. This was the car. The one that said, "You did it, baby." The one Imani would never expect. "Can I help you with something?" a voice said behind her. Danielle turned. The man was tall, white, late 30s, in a suit that looked like it cost more than her entire outfit. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't even look her in the eye for more than a second. "I'm just browsing," Danielle replied, her voice even polite. "Then you might want to check our pre-owned lot across town," he said, lips twitching into a half smirk. "This showroom's a bit specialized." Danielle blinked, catching the implication, but she didn't flinch. "I'm interested in this model," she said, motioning to the coupe. The man raised his eyebrows and gave a brief, dry chuckle. "That's a six-figure car. Not exactly grocery-getter material. We usually serve clients by appointment." She extended her hand. "Danielle. And I don't mind waiting." He didn't shake it. "Miles Carrington. I'm the floor manager here. And we're actually very booked today. If you're not here for a serious consultation, I'm going to have to ask you to free up the space." Danielle felt her stomach drop, not out of embarrassment, but something deeper. She had trained people like him, given raises, approved bonuses, created codes of conduct, and yet here she was being dismissed in her own empire. Before she could speak, another man stepped over, older, heavier, and clearly amused. "Something wrong, Miles?" he asked. "Just a little window shopping," Miles said, not bothering to lower his voice. The second man chuckled. "Ma'am, if you're looking for the Camry demo, that's the next street over." Danielle turned slowly. "I'm not looking for a Camry." "Could have fooled me," he said, then nodded to a cluster of associates nearby. A couple of them laughed too loudly. Customers began to turn and look. Danielle felt the heat of their stares pressing on her like stage lights. It wasn't just ridicule. It was the unspoken question, what is she doing here? The younger staff said nothing. Some looked away. Some watched arms crossed. None intervened, except one. Behind the front desk, a young woman with curly hair and warm brown eyes stepped forward. She looked barely out of college, her employee badge hanging from a slightly frayed lanyard. She cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she said, voice steady. "Has she done anything wrong?" Miles turned, clearly annoyed. "Brielle, this doesn't concern you." "I think it does," she said, taking a step closer. "She asked about a car." "That's what we're here for," Grant, the older man, scoffed. "You're new, right? Let us handle the floor." "She's a customer," Brielle said firmly. "And you're making a scene." Danielle met her eyes. A flicker of gratitude passed between them. Miles stepped in front of Brielle. "One more word and you can finish out your probation somewhere else." At that, a low murmur spread through the showroom. Danielle took a breath. Her hands were trembling, but not from fear. From fury held back with the kind of control that only comes from years of being underestimated. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said softly to Brielle. Then she turned and walked out, not with her head down, not rushed, but with the measured, deliberate stride of someone who had just taken names, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Danielle sat in her Prius with the windows rolled up and her hands resting on the steering wheel. The engine was off, but her thoughts were roaring. The humiliation hadn't pierced her pride. It had pierced something deeper, something older, something that had followed her since childhood, through college, through bank meetings where loans were denied, through boardrooms where she was underestimated again and again. She had thought she'd built a fortress where that kind of prejudice couldn't touch her anymore. She was wrong. Across the street, Crown Ridge Motors continued its polished performance. Customers strolled in, sales associates smiled and handed out cappuccinos. No one knew the woman who'd just been escorted out in shame was the reason that building even existed. That without her name on the founding documents, those employees wouldn't have desks, and that showroom wouldn't have walls. Danielle pulled out her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, then tapped open the secure messaging app she used for internal executive communications. To General Counsel Teresa Chang, CC Executive Assistant Naomi Nguyen, subject immediate action required, Crown Ridge Motors. Message, please clear my afternoon. Schedule an emergency board meeting at HQ within the next 2 hours. I want all West Coast regional directors present along with HR leadership and our legal team. Mark it urgent. I will explain in person. DG, she hit send. Then she reached for her canvas tote and pulled out a slim black garment bag from the back seat. Inside was a tailored slate gray pantsuit pressed just the night before. Today wasn't supposed to be about business, but business had just become very personal. By the time Danielle arrived at Green Auto Collective's downtown San Diego headquarters, the boardroom was already humming with tension. Department heads and legal advisors filed in quietly, sensing that whatever had sparked this meeting wasn't just financial. Danielle stood at the front of the room, no notes in hand, no slideshow, no formal agenda. She waited until the last chair was filled, then took a breath. This morning she began, her voice calm but firm. I visited Crown Ridge Motors as a customer, dressed plainly, without announcement. I did this because I wanted to see how our people treat someone they don't perceive as wealthy or important. She paused, letting the weight of that sentence sink in. What I experienced was hostility, mockery, and a culture of exclusion. Not from one employee, from multiple. Gasps, murmurs. I was denied basic service. I was humiliated in front of customers. One employee stood up for me, just one, and she was threatened with termination. Danielle gestured to Naomi, who handed out printed copies of an official HR policy document and a short transcript Danielle had typed up from memory word for word. I'm not bringing this to you because I'm angry. I'm bringing it to you because we've lost our way, and today we begin correcting it. Less than an hour later, Danielle's motorcade, a pair of sleek black Teslas and a Cadillac SUV, pulled up in front of Crown Ridge Motors. The same glass doors slid open. The same polished marble tiles caught the afternoon light. But everything else had changed. This time, Danielle wore the power she had earned. Her heels echoed through the room with quiet authority. Her pearl earrings gleamed beneath sharp cheekbones. And behind her walked Teresa Chung, general counsel, and two members of the corporate legal team. Naomi followed, carrying a binder of documentation. Every eye in the showroom turned, and this time they didn't look away. Miles, who'd been laughing with Grant at the espresso station, looked up and froze, his face drained of color. Danielle didn't stop until she stood in the exact spot where she'd been told to leave just hours before. She turned and faced the staff and customers who had gathered like an accidental audience. My name, she said clearly, is Danielle Green. I am the founder and majority owner of Green Auto Collective, this dealership included. Silence cracked through the air like lightning. I came here today not as an executive, but as a mother, to buy a car for my daughter. I wore plain clothes. I didn't drop names. I just wanted to be treated with basic decency. She turned toward Miles and Grant. You failed. Grant's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Teresa stepped forward and read from the HR policy document in her hand. As of this moment, Mr. Miles Carrington and Mr. Grant Lewis are relieved of their positions due to multiple violations of Green Auto's customer dignity policy and anti-discrimination standards. Miles stammered. Wait, I didn't know who she was. Danielle didn't blink. That's the problem. Across the room, Brielle stood behind the reception desk, frozen in disbelief. Danielle turned toward her. Ms. Brielle Carter, she said, her voice now warming, you were the only person here today who remembered what this company is supposed to stand for. You showed courage when others stayed silent. Brielle swallowed hard. I just thought it was the right thing to do. Danielle smiled. It was. And starting today, you're the new general manager of Crown Ridge Motors. The room stirred, heads turned, whispers broke out. Brielle's eyes welled with tears. Ma'am, I've only been here a few months. I'm still learning. Danielle stepped closer. Then you're perfect for the job, because real leadership starts with empathy, not tenure. Applause broke out, not from everyone, but enough to shift the air. The customers who had laughed now stood silent. A few turned toward the door. Others lowered their heads. Danielle looked around the room one last time. Let today be a reminder, she said. No one is above accountability, and no one should be below respect. Then she nodded to Naomi. Let's begin the transition. We have work to do. For the next several hours, Crown Ridge Motors ceased to be a showroom. It became a battlefield of accountability, and every polished surface reflected a new reality. While a few stunned clients trickled out the door, most stayed frozen in place. Curiosity, guilt, or maybe respect, anchoring their feet to the glossy floor. Danielle didn't waste time. She moved through the building with precise intention, speaking softly to department heads, asking for every internal performance review file connected to Miles and Grant. She personally checked the customer feedback reports, scoured employee surveys, and flagged training gaps that had been conveniently overlooked. The numbers told a story even worse than what she'd witnessed. Customers dressed casually had consistently rated the dealership lower in satisfaction. Diverse applicants had rarely made it past the interview stage. Promotion logs revealed a sharp tilt toward those with polished resumes and even more polished wardrobes. Danielle's company had been infected, not by incompetence, but by entitlement, and now the surgery had begun. Behind the showroom glass, Teresa Chang and her legal assistants gathered the terminated employees' access cards and personally escorted them out. Danielle didn't watch them go, not out of avoidance, but because her eyes were already on something more important. Brielle Carter stood near the reception desk with her badge still around her neck, her hands nervously twisting the lanyard. She looked equal parts terrified and overwhelmed. Several of her peers whispered among themselves, uncertain if her promotion was real or just symbolic. Danielle approached gently, placing a hand on Brielle's shoulder. "Let's talk," she said. They stepped into the newly designated manager's office, once Miles' domain. Danielle closed the door behind them and took a seat across from Brielle at the desk. For a long moment, she just looked at her. Not with scrutiny, but with quiet pride. "You don't need to be perfect," Danielle began. "You just need to be brave." Brielle nodded slowly, but her voice cracked. "I didn't think anyone would listen to me. I thought I'd get fired. Most people stay silent because of that," Danielle said. "But you didn't. And now this place has a real chance to grow into something better." Brielle's eyes welled up again. "I didn't do it for recognition." "I know," Danielle said gently. "That's why you deserve it." Outside the office, a shift was already beginning. Naomi and a regional director from Los Angeles stood in front of the showroom staff, distributing packets titled, "Respect Equity and Inclusive Service, a Cultural Rebuild." The instructions were clear: mandatory training for every employee, starting immediately. Gone were the champagne flutes. Gone was the playlist of soft jazz. Danielle had ordered them paused temporarily. Not to punish, but to reset the tone. Today wasn't about selling luxury. It was about remembering that respect doesn't require a dress code. Brielle returned to the reception desk that afternoon, this time standing taller. She didn't bark orders. She didn't play the boss. She just welcomed each customer with a warmth that reminded everyone what this place was supposed to feel like. And they responded. A middle-aged Latina mother returned with her teenage son to ask questions about financing. Brielle personally sat with them. A young black couple previously brushed off by Grant came back to look at the coupe Danielle had first admired. They were now greeted with open arms. Jake, one of the younger associates who had laughed awkwardly during Danielle's initial visit, quietly approached her. "Ms. Green," he said, "I want to apologize. I didn't speak up when I should have." Danielle looked at him steady but not cold. "I appreciate that, Jake, and you'll have a chance to prove that apology by how you treat every customer going forward." Jake nodded. "I won't forget this." By the end of the day, Teresa had filed all necessary documents to formalize the terminations and restructured internal reporting for the region. Naomi had scheduled 3 all-hands meetings for the coming week. HR issued a company-wide notice that Danielle's surprise visit would become a regular practice across all 47 dealerships. And in corporate offices across the country, the story spread like wildfire. CEO exposes discrimination in her own company, headlined one financial outlet. From humiliation to hope. How one woman is rebuilding her empire with empathy, wrote another. Danielle refused all interviews. She wasn't interested in headlines. But she didn't stop the story from spreading either. Sometimes the world needs to see a wound to understand the healing. That night, as the city lights flickered over San Diego Bay, Danielle sat in her home office watching the sunset through tall glass windows. On the desk beside her sat a silver gift box inside a miniature replica of the luxury coupe she still intended to give Imani. She picked it up smiling softly, then set it back down and opened her laptop. An email from Brielle blinked at the top of her inbox. Subject: "Thank you for believing in people like me." Message: "I still feel like I'm dreaming, but tomorrow morning I'll walk in ready to do the work. If I get anything wrong, I hope you'll guide me. If I get it right, I'll make sure someone else feels safe enough to speak. I won't waste this chance." Danielle's reply was short. "You don't need to be perfect. Just honest, consistent, and kind. That's leadership." She clicked send, leaned back in her chair, and finally let the weight of the day settle in. The tears she hadn't allowed herself earlier now came quietly. Not out of pain, but release. What had started as a simple gift for her daughter had become something much bigger. Not just for Brielle, not just for Crown Ridge Motors, but for every quiet person in every quiet room who needed to know someone was finally listening. 3 weeks passed, and in that time, Crown Ridge Motors underwent a transformation that no marketing campaign could have achieved. There were no fireworks, no glossy commercials, no gimmicky rebrands. What changed was quieter but deeper. You could feel it the moment you stepped in through the door. Gone was the tight, cold atmosphere of hushed whispers and forced smiles. In its place, a gentle hum of welcome. The staff no longer glanced at clothes before offering help. They looked at faces, at stories, at people. Brielle Carter, once a receptionist afraid to speak too loud, was now the general manager of one of the most respected luxury dealerships on the West Coast. She didn't change her voice. She didn't change her warmth. She simply led from the heart and people followed. Every morning she arrived early, often with a fresh box of pastries for the team. Not to bribe, but to connect. During huddles, she didn't talk numbers first. She talked service. She asked about their experiences, what felt awkward, what felt right, what they were proud of. Staff who had once kept their heads down now offered ideas. Some of them even smiled for real. Danielle had stepped back from the daily scene, but kept close tabs. She received weekly reports not only on sales, but on staff stories. She asked for examples of conflict handled well, for moments where a customer left happier than they arrived. She cared more about empathy metrics than upsells, and her executives quickly followed suit. At Crown Ridge, Brielle installed a simple new tradition, the Every Person Matters board. It sat next to the entrance, featuring Polaroids of customers from all walks of life. A retired veteran who bought a convertible after his final deployment. A nurse who surprised her husband with a hybrid for their anniversary. A single mom who'd saved for 3 years to buy her dream car. Every face told a story, and every staff member who helped them left a note underneath. Mr. Hayes made me think about how kindness sticks with people longer than horsepower. Maria's story reminded me that our job is to listen first. This wasn't some performance. This was culture, and it was spreading. Across the Green Auto Collective, change took root. Dealerships from Seattle to Houston began implementing equity training and customer-first workshops inspired by Crown Ridge's new model. Sales staff were taught how to read a need, not a wallet. Hiring managers were retrained to interview for emotional intelligence as much as experience. Even the once rigid performance review template was restructured. One section now asked, "Give an example of how you made a customer feel seen, not just sold to." At headquarters, Danielle launched an internal newsletter titled Road to Respect. Every week, a different employee shared a story, some joyful, some hard, but all honest. Brielle's story was the first, and it traveled fast. Within a month, a journalist from a major business magazine reached out. Then a university leadership program requested Danielle to keynote. She declined, but she did approve one feature, a profile titled The CEO Who Walked in Anonymous and Changed Her Industry from Within. The story went viral, not just because Danielle was powerful, but because she had refused to use her power for revenge. She had used it for restoration, and yet through all the press, Danielle never lost sight of why this had all started. Imani, her daughter, her why, her spark. It was a Friday when Danielle returned to Crown Ridge Motors, not as a secret shopper, not as a CEO on a mission, but as a mother ready to give a gift. She pulled up in the same Prius. This time she wasn't hiding anything. Her blazer was sharp. Her curls were pulled back into a soft bun. She wore heels that clicked confidently against the newly buffed marble floor. Inside, the staff straightened instinctively, not out of fear, but respect. Brielle greeted her with a hug and a warm grin. "We're ready," she said. "Everything's waiting." Danielle nodded, her heart beating faster than she expected. And then Imani walked in. 26 years old, brilliant eyes, and the kind of presence that made a room sit up. She had no idea what was coming. She thought her mom was taking her to lunch. But when she saw the bow-tied coupe in the center of the showroom, silver sleek radiant, her hand flew to her mouth. "Mom!" Danielle didn't say a word at first. She just walked over, picked up the keys, and placed them gently in her daughter's hand. "You earned this," she said, her voice thick with pride. "Not because of a degree, but because you've always moved through this world with grace. You never let it harden you. I want you to have something that reminds you every day you belong in any space you enter." Imani blinked fast. "But this car, it's yours." Danielle smiled. "And so is every door you walk through." Brielle stood nearby, mist in her eyes. The staff watched quietly. Some clapped. A few wiped their cheeks. Imani looked around and whispered, "This place, it feels different. It feels like it breathes." Danielle nodded. "It does now." They took a moment, a full, quiet moment. Then Imani got behind the wheel. Danielle stood back, arms folded, heart soaring. The silver coupe purred to life, rolling slowly toward the exit. Staff lined up to wave her out, not because she was a VIP, but because she was family. And as Imani turned onto the street, sunlighting her path, Danielle felt something settle in her chest. Not pride, peace, true peace. The kind that comes only when justice has done its work and people remember how to treat one another again. A few months later, the story of Crown Ridge Motors wasn't just a corporate tale, it had become something of a movement. Not because Danielle Green wanted publicity, in fact, she rarely spoke publicly at all, but because her decision to walk in without a title had sparked something timeless, a confrontation between quiet power and loud prejudice. And the public saw it. They felt it. They remembered it. Across the Green Auto Collective, dealerships began to model their culture after Crown Ridge, not just with diversity posters or slogans on walls, but in daily practice. Associates were trained to recognize unconscious bias. Sales targets included customer satisfaction scores, not just revenue. And each location began featuring what came to be known as a customer story circle, an end-of-week moment where staff gathered to share one meaningful interaction from the showroom floor. Some stories were small. A nervous young man trying to buy his first car after his parents passed away, greeted with respect, not suspicion. An elderly woman who thought she'd be ignored only to have a service associate sit beside her for an hour listening to her stories of her late husband and their road trips. Some stories were bigger. A black pastor who returned to a dealership where he'd once been dismissed welcomed this time with an open door and a handshake from the new manager who happened to be Latina. A queer couple who had once feared judgment now proudly bought their dream car with support from a showroom that genuinely celebrated their moment. And always in the background was the ripple effect of Danielle's quiet revolution. She never asked for recognition, but it came anyway. One morning, a brown envelope arrived at her office marked from a state university in Georgia. Inside a single sheet of paper read, "We've included your story in our Ethics and Leadership 301 curriculum. Thank you for showing students what leadership looks like when it stands up quietly without vengeance, but with unwavering truth." Danielle smiled, but she didn't frame it. She simply tucked it in her desk drawer. She still drove the Prius. She still wore her old sneakers on weekends. And she still insisted her executive team rotate through the showrooms every quarter, not as bosses, but as observers. To listen, to see, to check if the lessons were sticking, and they were. The end-of-year reports told a new story. Customer retention rates had climbed. Employee morale was the highest in company history, and Brielle Shee was no longer a probationary hire. She had just been named Regional Training Director for Southern California. Her job, teaching other dealerships how to lead with respect from the ground up. On a cool Saturday afternoon, Danielle stood at the back of a staff appreciation event held in Crown Ridge's delivery bay. Food trucks lined the lot. There were music and families and balloons. The walls where she'd once stood humiliated were now covered in vibrant murals, painted by local artists, each one symbolizing inclusion, growth, and the promise of second chances. Imani was there too now, working for a nonprofit focused on mentoring first-generation college students. She watched her mom with a knowing smile and whispered, "You didn't just change the place. You changed the people." Danielle laughed gently. Sometimes that's the only way anything ever really changes. She turned her eyes, catching the glint of the silver coupe as it sparkled beneath a string of cafe lights. But what shined more brightly was the laughter of staff, the ease between customers and employees, and the sense of something sacred having been reclaimed. Because power, when used right, doesn't dominate. It restores. And dignity once denied can be returned if someone's willing to stand up, even in scuffed sneakers and a ball cap, and say, "This is not how we treat people here." Danielle would never forget the moment Miles told her to leave, nor would she forget the silence that followed. But what she remembered most vividly was Brielle's voice, small but steady, saying, "She's a customer like anyone else." That sentence, spoken in a room full of silence, had done more than challenge authority. It had planted the seed for a forest of change, and today it had bloomed. As the music faded and the lights dimmed over Crown Ridge Motors that evening, I want you to take something away from this story, something more than just a victory or a well-earned promotion. This story isn't just about one woman being disrespected or one receptionist speaking up. It's about the everyday moments where you and I get to choose between silence and courage, between convenience and conscience. Danielle didn't shout. She didn't demand respect with her title. She waited, she watched. And when the moment came, she responded not with revenge, but with clarity, accountability, and grace. That's leadership. That's dignity. And Brielle. She proved that you don't need years of experience or a title to do the right thing. Sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to look away. Maybe you've been in a room like that. Maybe you've seen someone dismissed, judged, or humiliated for how they looked, talked, or dressed. The question is, what did you do? What will you do next time? Because the truth is, justice in everyday life isn't loud. It's quiet. It's patient. But it never backs down. It whispers, do better, and waits for someone brave enough to say it out loud. If this story moved you, I invite you to share it with someone you love. Someone who needs a reminder that we all hold the power to make change, not with a fist, but with a voice. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.